If you were the victim of a smear campaign, what would you do? Hey meddling kids, wanna watch a movie? Today, we are going to be talking about one of my favorite creations in the Scooby-Doo franchise ever. We are talking about Scooby-Doo 2: Monsters Unleashed. For those of you who may not know, this masterpiece of a film comes from the mind of James Gunn, who is the director and writer of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Say what you want about the MCU and the current state of the franchise, and oh my gosh, this is the quality of films they put out these days. That's a conversation for another day. But overall, the Guardians are a pretty loved team, and that goes to show that James Gunn knows how to write a good team movie. Riding off the coattails of the first Scooby-Doo live-action movie, this movie was released in 2004 and has managed to stay influential ever since. I remember as a kid watching this movie and having a great time because it's Scooby-Doo related. And now as I'm older and understand more of the jokes in the movie, I think it's still pretty good. So strap in as we get ready to talk about Scooby-Doo 2: Monsters Unleashed. We open to see Mystery Inc. arriving at this red carpet opening of the Coulsonian Criminology Museum. There's an exhibit that's dedicated to them and all the cool monsters that they've caught over the years and all the costumes from the creatures they discovered. If this museum was in real life, I would be there every day of the week. This looks so cool. Why haven't we made like a Scooby-Doo tribute museum that is based on this? That would be so neat. Regardless, as the team is walking into the museum, we get a shot of each group of fans that this team attracts. Fred has a fan club of teenage girls. Daphne has this duo of men who are absolute freaks. Velma has a gaggle of lesbians.
We love you, Velma!
And that's the only appropriate reaction to seeing Linda Cardellini. Shaggy's fans are a group of stoners, and Scooby, of course, has a pack of dogs. As we're walking into the museum, we are greeted by Heather Jasper Howe, who is a reporter who is initiating a lot of the backlash that Mystery Inc. gets in this movie. Inside the museum, everybody's celebrating, having a great time, truly just basking in the success that they have garnered over the years of catching these criminals. Something I forgot to mention. Velma meets this man named Patrick at this opening night party, and they establish that he is going to be her love interest in this movie. He's the curator for the museum, he collected all the costumes, and they're both kind of nerdy. Before things can be too much of a celebration though, we get interrupted by this masked figure who is known from this point on as the evil masked figure, which is a very creative name. I have no idea how they came up with that. This figure has reanimated one of the previous culprits that the gang caught, the pterodactyl ghost, and uses it to steal two of the costumes before fleeing the museum. After the gang is unable to stop this very well planned out heist, Heather Jasper Howe ridicules them and says how they don't care about the attack that happens and how they were unable to stop it, and starts this smear campaign about them that you'll see through the entire movie. The gang leaves the museum and goes back to their headquarters, where on the news, Shaggy and Scooby are hearing about how the world thinks that they're screw-ups and the gang thinks that they screwed up, and they internalize this. Shaggy and Scooby decide they are going to better themselves and be better detectives. And how do they do this? By dressing up like other members of the gang.
The first step in solving a mystery would be to wear the right attire. I'm sorry, Daph, but your go-go boots didn't fit me.
After that great scene, the gang realizes that maybe they need to start investigating the crime that just happened. They figure that an old enemy must be behind the attack since it happened at the museum where all these costumes were, where this pillar of Mystery Inc.'s good work was. So they start to revisit old cases, starting with the old pterodactyl ghost, Jonathan Jacobo. Jacobo died in a failed prison escape, so they instead go to his cellmate Jeremiah Wickles, who played the Black Knight. After breaking and entering into an old man's home and dodging a series of life-threatening traps, the gang finds this book on how to reanimate the monsters and to make them actual monsters. Scooby and Shaggy find a note inviting Wickles to a nightclub called the Faux Ghost, and they decide to pocket this note so that they can do some real detective work. While the gang is looking around for clues, they are attacked by the Black Knight ghost, and Daphne kicks some ass while Velma finds a weak spot. And something I love about this stint of the live action movies is that Daphne is this self-defense wizard. I love that they took her away from the damsel in distress role and were like, no, she's gonna kick ass, guys. Before fully fleeing the manor, the gang finds the key ingredient to making these monsters come back to life is an element called randomonium, which is found in an old mining town. The gang splits up in this next scene. Shaggy and Scooby pretend that Scooby has rabies through some incredible acting work.
Hey, guys. Scooby's feeling kinda like he's got rabies.
So that they can then go to the bar that they found in the note in Wickles Manor. That means then Daphne, Velma, and Fred decide to go back to the museum with Patrick, and before we get to the museum, we get one of the best scenes in cinema, ladies and gents.
Who's your mommy?
It's perfect. I have no notes. This is great. This is fine cinema. Incredible. Good job. When the rest of the team arrives to the museum, they find out that all the costumes have been stolen, which sends Patrick into a frenzy and he freaks out. And Fred does a pretty major goof, guys. In this interview with Heather Jasper Howell, she's pressing him, being like, how did you let this get away? How did you let this happen? What is going on? And he says,
I think Coolsville sucks. No! Don't record that!
He should not have said it, knowing that there is a smear campaign being run about him and his team, and that turns the entire town against him. So now everyone hates Mystery Inc. However, Shaggy and Scooby are doing great at the bar. They have these incredible disguises that allow them to interrogate and ask questions about who might be responsible for these attacks. But they find out pretty quickly that Wickles is trying to actually mend his evil ways and get away from crime. Shaggy has to leave Scooby for a moment, and in the time that Shaggy leaves Scooby, Scooby is dancing on the dance floor, absolutely breaking it down, but he gets a little too lost in the sauce, and his disguise falls off. Now it's revealed that the talking disco Great Dane is the same talking Great Dane that had them arrested for all the crimes they committed. Not to absolutely flex on these hardened criminals, but I'm pretty sure that I could use my very large brain to figure out that the talking Great Dane that is asking me about crimes that might have been committed in the town is the same talking Great Dane that had me arrested and is plastered all over the bar that I'm in. There's literally a game of whack-a-mole where the gang is the moles. I feel like I would recognize that. While we're off topic, I want to address how good the set design is in this movie. The HQ, would love to live in it. This bar, perfect dive bar set. The museum, oh, it would ruin my wallet. The set designers of this film did an incredible job, and they deserve some applause. A nice gentle round of applause. Back to the movie though. The patrons are obviously very unhappy that this reluctant crime-fighting duo, I should say, is in this bar, and so they get kicked out. Once they're kicked out though, they find Patrick, who has been established as the very nervous, quiet guy, threatening another dude and just demanding answers about what's happening with the museum. It's a little out of character for him, so Scooby and Shaggy note that in their brain and are like, whoa, he's kind of a weirdo.
It was a joke? Yeah. Oh, that was good. You had a lot of fun.
Fred, Daphne, and Velma then go to the mines to figure out what Wickles might be doing, and they find out that he's actually trying to turn it into an amusement park and ruins his investor meeting. Dude, poor Wickles. This poor guy, this guy can't turn his life around. The gang then travels to the Monster Hive, which is the location where all of the costumes are being turned into real monsters. Shaggy and Scooby stumble across a fridge full of potions, and it leads to this masterpiece.
I'm buff!
Through a series of inexplicable goofs, Scooby and Shaggy manage to mess with the monster control panel so much that they bring a ton of angry monsters to life.
You're pushing your luck, Scoob!
I truly don't know how they goofed it this bad, but the gang has to sprint out of the hideout with the control panel. As the gang is fleeing, we get this little cut-in scene that just shows that the evil masked figure is terrorizing the town with the tar monster, so I am sure the citizens of Coolsville is loving Mystery Inc. right now. At the gang's old high school clubhouse, Scooby and Shaggy are now devastated. They screwed up again, and in a pretty major way. And I think that's fair to be upset about that, but at the same time, looking at the control panel, how were they supposed to know what buttons did what? They just shouldn't have touched it. Inside of the clubhouse, Velma gets all the lights turned on and the power running while Fred looks at this picture frame and reminisces on a time where the gang played frisbee together. They all kind of talk about the pressures that they have been under now that they are established as the only ones in Coolsville who will solve any crime or help any of the citizens, which is not stressful at all, I'm sure, for them. During this reminiscing time though, Velma, in her infinite wisdom, has realized that they can reverse engineer the control panel to turn the monsters back to just dust and goo and stuff. And through a rockin' montage, Fred, Daphne, and Velma figure out how to reverse engineer it. Meanwhile, outside, Scooby and Shaggy are still not contributing to the gang.
Like they're totally having a montage in there without us.
I'm gonna be honest, this line genuinely made me laugh out loud. It's ridiculous. It's a great line. They're beating themselves up for being goofy little guys, and I'm going to be honest, I felt an emotion. I know, a shocker. But before I could feel that for too long, Shaggy skips a rock and it hits Captain Cutler's ghost's helmet, and now they're being chased again by a monster. The gang then has to drive back to the monster hive, but they're being chased by a ton of monsters that are trying to kill them. Velma has fixed the control panel, so now when they plug it in, all the monsters will disappear and it'll be great. In this crazy chase scene, we see almost all of Mystery Inc. fall out of the Mystery Machine. We see Scooby drive the van. Scooby successfully drives them to the Mystery Hive because he's not useless. That dog doesn't need to know how to drive, but he did. He saved you guys. He's just a little guy. The gang is now on the clock and trying to figure out how to get to the base station to plug in the control panel before they get got by all the monsters that are chasing them. First one that we see is the Black Knight, who is here to mess up Fred. There's this fun, like, Western duel slash joust scene between Fred and the Black Knight ghost. It's so cute. I loved it. The gang then gets separated again when the 10,000 volt ghost shows up and sparks up a little riverbank in between Shaggy, Velma, and Scooby and Daphne. She tells them to keep going and she decides to martial arts her way through this problem. I wonder how bad that might turn out. She gets shocked really bad and then is thrown across the junkyard and lands next to Fred, where they're both like, I guess this is how we die. Gonna be honest, little dark for a children's movie, but sure, why not? Shaggy, Velma, and Scooby are now all racing to get to the control panel when they run across these freaky little skeleton guys. Velma decides to sacrifice herself in this scene because Fred and Daphne can't be the only ones who sacrifice themselves, and she tells Scooby and Shaggy that they are much faster than her. They're going to get to that base station first. Shaggy and Scooby then admit that they think they're screw-ups and that they don't want to do it, that they need Velma to go and do it, and Velma then admits that, hey, you guys aren't that bad. She says that they're brave for always being true to themselves, and that gives Scooby and Shaggy the confidence they need to start running for the base station. The gang is now all trying to sprint to where this control panel is kept to try and all stop the monsters together, but they are being hounded by a lot of monsters. When the gang finally gets into the control room, they are almost immediately stopped by the tar monster, who starts consuming them in the tar and slowly suffocating them. This movie is rated PG. I just want to put that out there. Scooby uses a fire extinguisher to freeze part of the tar monster so that it will break, and then Shaggy can frisbee throw the control panel to Scooby. And something I like about this last fight is seeing Scooby kind of do a little surfing routine through the tar monster using the fire extinguisher. I thought it was kind of fun. I thought it was cute. It was ridiculous, which is what this movie is. Anyway, of course, Scooby makes it to the base station, plugs in the control panel, and manages to turn all the monsters into dust. And just like that, Coolsville is saved from the evil masked figure. Speaking of that guy, we find out that he was actually Heather Jasper Howe. Shit, sorry guys, my bad. He was actually Jonathan Jacobo, who was disguised as Heather Jasper Howe, who was disguised as the evil masked figure. And of course, the camera guy, who had no idea that Heather Jasper Howe was actually an old man in disguise, was her accomplice. After that wraps up, Velma and Patrick then have this moment of making up, realizing that she wants to unapologetically be herself and wants to be with someone who wants her unapologetically her. I guess sexy Velma isn't appreciated in this world for some reason. Scooby sees Shaggy in Captain Cutler's ghost helmet and decides to beat the shit out of him. Fred and Daphne kiss, and we end this movie with a dancing scene at the club that Shaggy and Scooby snuck into. The perfect end to a perfect movie. I think from an audience perspective, this movie was very well received. Freddie Prinze Jr. has discussed about how he used to view this movie from a studio success standpoint, but after interacting with some fans later on, he's learned about how beloved it was in the fandom. Speaking of a studio perspective, this movie was a total failure. The budget for this movie was 25 to 85 million, so for our sake, I'm just gonna say 85 million. In box offices, it made $181.2 million, which in theory would be a success had the first live action movie not done significantly better. The first live action movie made 275 million in box offices, so clearly much better received than this one was. Of course, there's movie snobs and angry parents who come forward and talk about how this movie isn't that clever. It's not that funny. It's not a highbrow film. But I think it's important to contextualize this film, really all films. I think that's something that a lot of people fail to consider when it comes to comparing different movies, is that they can't all be compared to on the same scale. Each film, I believe, needs to be held to its own standard. Sure, there are things that you critique. I don't love every single thing that I watch, but I also don't think it's fair to compare Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed to The Passion of Christ, which was one of the most popular movies in 2004. I think another huge flaw in not necessarily the movie, but the behind the scenes of the movie is who they were marketing this movie towards. James Gunn has talked about another version of this movie that was R-rated and for adults, and you can tell by some of the jokes in the movie that were still left in after significant cuts, that was kind of the direction they were trying to go in. Had James Gunn been able to do the version of the movie that he wanted to do and marketed it towards young adults, or like at very least teenagers, I think it would have been received a lot better. A huge chunk of the backlash was from angry parents talking about how inappropriate the movie is for children. And that's a fair criticism. It is rated PG and you have scenes like this.
Who's your mommy?
Had it been marketed as a stoner film though, and kept a lot of the jokes from the original version of James Gunn's script, I think it would have done a lot better. But then it gets into the issue of changing something that is so familiar to audiences. We saw when we looked at all the Scooby-Doo TV shows and their success and failures, a lot of it had to do with changing the formula too much to the point where audiences hated it. It's this tight wire that you have to walk whenever you're adapting a franchise into something else, of how much can you change before audiences hate it. I think retroactively looking at this movie, you can tell why it gained a huge cult following. It follows into a very campy formula that a lot of cult classic films eventually develop. People have flocked to this film over the years because it's incredibly quotable, has an amazing cast, truly could not have been casted better, and I think it's just the right amount of goofy. If you're ever looking for a movie that's not that serious to kind of poke fun at or laugh at, I think this is one that people typically go with. Movies from our childhood typically fall into one of two categories. They suck or they were able to hold up, and I think this is one that retroactively looking has held up. And because of that retroactive lens that you need to put on this movie, I think James Gunn might have been ahead of his time with this one. You look at movies like Do Revenge and No Hard Feelings and Theater Camp and Bottoms, where it's a lot of that like camp, ridiculous, over-the-top antics that is very popular in film right now. It's made a resurgence and people are loving it. I think had Scooby-Doo come out during this time, people would have loved the movie that much more and it would have done better in box offices. And of course, I could not talk about the success of this movie without mentioning all of the Shaggy has the power of a god memes. That meme is great. It is incredible. I thought it was ridiculous when I first saw it. I remember cackling when I saw those memes. And that's something I don't do often. And I think that meme allowed for this cult following to grow and pick up more traction because people were starting to look at the movie again and realize just how crazy and weird it is. Overall, I think that this was a great time. I think James Gunn's writing style is so unique and so entertaining to watch. That's part of the reason why the Guardians of the Galaxy are so beloved in the Marvel Cinematic Universe franchise. I think a huge part of what led to the downfall of these live-action movies was corporate greed and poor marketing. Since the release of this film, it's come out in interviews that Matthew Lillard and other actors wanted to be paid to a similar level that Freddie Prinze Jr. was, and instead of paying the actors fairly, they went to Freddie Prinze Jr. and asked him to take a pay cut instead of, I don't know, pay your actors, baby. Also, looking at the year that this movie was released, 2004, I've said it a couple times in this video, it makes sense why this kind of comedy didn't exactly land, especially with the rating that it got. I think a PG rating on this movie is pretty generous. Like I said, had it been marketed for older people, I think parents would have been less upset with it and thus the reception wouldn't have been as bad as it was. But I'll leave that up to you guys to discuss with me in the comment section down below. If you made it to the end of this video, dude, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on this journey with me. I swear not all of these videos will be about Scooby-Doo. I just love this movie so much and I wanted to talk about it. I've been having the time of my life making these videos and I hope that translates to you all watching. I also hope that you have enjoyed watching my hair dry over the course of this video. I showered just for you, so you better appreciate it. Feel free to leave a comment down below either talking about this video or let me know what you'd like to see from this channel. Also, dude, why not subscribe? Let's go on this media journey together. We love watching things together. This is fun. I'll send a little smooch your way, and I'll see you next time.